Hey guys, it's Q&A Tuesday. Before I get into some questions and forget about it, what am I wearing? I'm wearing my vintage two-door snowflake that I guys showed you as part of that My Collection video that you guys saw a few weeks ago. So, gonna jump into the first question from Dmitry Goldenberg. Hi Roman, this was one of the most interesting videos that you have done, at least for me. Hearing how you evaluate ROI and negotiate was fascinating. Can you please talk about how you divide responsibilities across your team? Do you have different salespeople by division, watch, jewelry, brands, region, or some other roles and responsibilities? Breakdown. You're referring to the video I did in New York, the insight to the industry at the trade show. Surprisingly enough, it was fairly recently that we kind of divided some responsibilities within the company. And the reason for that is because, again, this company went from a one-man operation, which was me, to where we are today. We have close to 40 employees now. We sort of have a family environment with a corporate structure, right? So I have a chief operating officer, I have a chief marketing officer, I have a chief logistics officer that runs the downstairs, the shipping and receiving. So within actual departments outside of sales, everything is extremely structured. I have a head accountant. She has 2 bookkeepers that work under her. I have a sales manager under which other salespeople fall along with customer service people. I have a content department. I have a manager in that department under which all the photographers and videographers fall under, as well as freelancers that we use for editing and things of that nature, right? Obviously, my CMO oversees marketing, and my CLO oversees shipping, receiving, quality control, inventory, and all those other wonderful things. And then my COO is my right-hand man. He's the one that helps me manage my day-to-day. But when it comes to sales, it's a funny thing how we divide all that stuff. It's the business partners. I told you guys we're a product of 2 merged companies as of 8 years ago, where we merged with a jewelry wholesaler. The 2 guys there, Alex and Gary, which you often see in my videos, they're the ones that are responsible for buying jewelry, and rightfully so, because they have, between 2 of them, they have 50 years experience of buying and selling jewelry wholesale. So when it comes to buying jewelry, it's obviously on them. However, our salespeople over the years have learned many, many trades. And my sales department is the one department where everybody that works there is sort of the jack of all trades. They know everything about watches, they know everything about jewelry. They can both buy and sell jewelry. They can take trades. They can make those decisions without anyone actually really being involved. And that came from experience. As the company grew, as my sales department grew from just Anna by herself to everybody else, so did their skills, and so did their wealth of knowledge in various things that we touch upon. We don't just sell watches and jewelry, we also sell luxury accessories. May not require as much knowledge as, let's say, watches or jewelry for that matter. But, there are guys out there that are avid pen collectors, and when they call here, they want to talk to somebody that knows about the limited Estée Dupont pens or some monographer pens or whatever else we sell. I myself don't have a huge knowledge in that. I rely on my sales department to talk to them about that, or my customer service people, right? But naturally, there's still a division. I have guys in my sales department where 90% of their sales are wholesale, and specifically jewelry, specifically watches. I have girls in my sales department who most of their sales are actually jewelry to retail clients. For example, Anna mostly does retail. She does a little bit of wholesale. For the most part, she does retail sales because Anna was the first salesperson to join Luxury Bazaar over 10 years ago. So naturally, she has a Rolodex of clients that's a mile long. So whenever something new comes in, before it even makes it online, it gets sold because Anna is able to offer it to her long-term clients that she knows they're into specific things. The partners themselves are responsible for buying as well. Myself and Arthur do a lot of the watch buying in the company, but so do the salespeople. Sometimes they run it by us, sometimes it's a no-brainer, they don't even run it by us, and they buy it. But it's not broken down by brand or anything else. I ensure that anybody that's in sales should be well-diversed enough to talk about any watch, to know about the market value of any watch. I don't feel it would be productive to have, a person per brand. Here's my guy, he's my Panerai guy, he's my only Panerai guy. This guy does all the Panerai buying and all the Panerai selling. What happens when Panerai market is soft, like it is today? What is this Panerai salesperson doing? A, he's not making any commissions for sure because the sales are not nearly the same. And now all of a sudden I have a Richard Mille sales guy that's making $1 gazillion in commissions because Richard Mille is so hot right now, they're flying off the shelves and he's trading them back and forth while the Panerai guy is sitting there sucking his thumbs. It doesn't work that way. Everybody gets a fair shot at selling every single piece of inventory that we have here. I felt like that was the right choice from the beginning, and I still feel it's the right choice now. Hope that explains it a little bit. Question from James Mlock. What are your thoughts on Sapphire watches? Is it really difficult to make? How can Hublot make them by the hundreds? What are things or circumstances that could break or destroy a Sapphire? As far as my thoughts on watches, remember I bought one and I wore it for a while, the Hublot Crystal Sapphire, and now I'm actually thinking about wearing its counterpart, with the black dial that's not all clear or all white, I should say. The process of making them, I couldn't really tell you how difficult in comparison to regular watch it is to make them, but what I can tell you is that any major watch manufacturer, whether it's Hublot, AP, or something else, they only have to do something once. And remember, although most of these watches are still put together by hand, it's still sort of a streamlined process. It's an assembly line, if you will, right? Unless you're talking about something super complicated where a highly skilled watchmaker has to work on a particular watch they only make 5 of, let's say. But once Richard Mille came out with the crystal Sapphire Tourbillon, the RM56, right, that's $2 million now, you know, everybody quickly jumped on a bandwagon, as they all do with each other, right? There's nothing wrong with that either.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
And they started doing the same thing. What is a sapphire watch? It's a stone watch, right? The sapphire crystals on your watches, well, I shouldn't say that, this one is actually plastic. But the sapphire crystals on your watches today are made out of sapphire, which is a stone, right? And people have worked with stones, with precious stones or semi-precious stones for hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, way before wristwatches were even born. So the experience of working with stone is actually there. So what do you have to do? It's really not about making the actual parts out of sapphire, because again, it's not a solid case, it's comprised of a bunch of parts, right? It's really having the technology, streamlined technology at that, within your manufacturing facilities or outsourcing to somebody else to be able to produce those, and not one of, but many of, however many you decide to make. So the first Sapphire Hublot they came out with, the one that I wore, they made 500 pieces, right? And then what came with another one, they have a blue one and a red one, and so on and so on and so on, right? So bottom line is that the minute they're able to streamline the manufacture of any given part, it's no different manufacturing a sapphire case or a part of a sapphire case than it is a particular mainspring, a particular column or wheel within the watch. It is really no difference. It's about the equipment, it's about the process, it's about streamlining that process. And once they do that once, they can do it 500 times over. So the initial part may have been somewhat difficult, and I'm sure there was some trial and errors here and there, and stuff was cracking or breaking or not coming out looking good, whatever it might be. Like in any manufacturing, I don't care what you're manufacturing, you know, the first thing you do is you streamline the process. You figure out a way and the tools to do it with. And then once you do that once, you can repeat it 1,000 times over. What are things or circumstances that could break or destroy a sapphire? A hammer.
Hammer time.
A hammer is the one thing that will crush that stone.
Go!
It's like a diamond, right? A diamond is one of the hardest stones out there. They put diamond dust on drill bits. They put diamond dust on blades that can cut through seemingly anything. You take a diamond, you can scratch a piece of glass with it, right? But the minute you take a hammer to a diamond, it's done, right? And the same thing would be with the sapphire. It's not as hard as a diamond, obviously, but just banging into a door handle or even dropping your watch will most likely not damage that. I know a lot of guys that have dropped their watches with the crystal down onto the ground and the crystal doesn't break because it's still a pretty tough material. There's a reason why they chose crystal. And it's somewhat scratch proof. It's a lot more scratch resistant, let's say, than a plastic top like on this Tudor Snowflake, which is why they eventually went from plastic crystals to sapphire crystals. So I hope that answers your question. Here's someone that gave me a great idea. EBH, great video, thank you. Question, I'd like to see a video about quality in steel bracelets and clasps of all kinds of different brands. When I purchase a watch, the quality of a bracelet and clasp is highly important for me. It's actually a great idea, EBH, and I will do that on what's on my desk. Finally, you should say that because the clasps on some of these older Rolexes and Tudors are pretty flimsy. And again, they get even flimsier over time. But I like that idea. Thank you for that. I will certainly make sure I do that on one of the episodes of What's on My Desk. Let's move on to Frederick Ganser. Roman, as always, great show. And as always, I'm learning more and more. Thank you. Here's my question. What are your thoughts on the decline of Baselworld? Seems like the Swatch Group and several others' future is in question. I think Rolex, Patek, etc. will always be there. It kind of seems like it is separating the real big from the real normal. What is Baselworld in general? It's a huge, huge marketing stunt, right? Imagine tomorrow I take a major accessible metropolitan area, and by accessible with Switzerland, it being duty-free, right? And I take all my merchandise that I have in my vault downstairs, watches, jewelry, accessories, whatever else under the sun, I beautifully display it in a nice room, and I invite a bunch of people, I market it enough, and a bunch of people come. And at the same token, I am selling that stuff to them. I'm actually taking orders. I want that watch. Okay, great, I'll get it for you. Let me take a deposit, or I have a relationship with you, you got it. I take 100 orders for the same exact watch, and I only have one in stock. I go out there, I order the watches or manufacture them, and I sell it back to the client. While that client traditionally in Baselworld was the authorized dealer, right? Basel was the place where once a year all the dealers converge onto one place where you walk into what seemingly is a fairy tale, right? Because if you look at if you guys have never been to Basel, or if you have been to Basel, you know what I'm talking about. You walk in there, some of the display that these companies put out is just amazing. I was there last time. I remember Breitling putting up, I don't know, 1,000-gallon aquarium above its booth, which was bright blue with yellow fish swimming through it, signifying the color. A Rolex, 2 marble 3-story buildings next to each other with a bridge over them with water underneath, well, one being a movie theater. Patek always has that traditional glass cylinder booth that was 5 stories high, right? And then when I say 5 stories high, don't take it lightly. These are buildings with offices and showrooms and movie theaters in the case of Rolex. At the end of the day, you would think it's all about showing off, but it's not. It's still a marketing technique. You're showing how big badass you are. And as an authorized dealer, you're still a customer walking into that place and you're looking to pick up some watch lines. The better the hole, the closer the location to the main entrance, the more expensive it is. These companies spend millions displaying in Basel. I know somebody that does a show with vintage jewelry in Basel. He's in hole 4, which is not the main hole where like Rolex and Patek are. It's actually across the street. That's where a lot of the stone guys are with big important stones and important vintage jewelry are. The show costs him upwards of $500,000, and he has a booth that's maybe the size of 2 of these tables, right? And it's not as fancy as a 5-story building that Patek built, right? I can't even imagine what it costs Patek to display their Rolex, for that matter. And at the same token, you have retail clients that go there as a destination, right? I know a lot of watch collectors that will fly to Baselworld just to go around, look at all the novelties, to discover new brands, to look at independents that are God knows where on the 4th floor, by themselves, right? To check out what's new, what are the new innovations. There's a lot of parties going on. A lot of people I know, a lot of dealers go there just for the parties because a lot of these manufacturers, they put on such fancy parties where you get to meet a lot of important people, a lot of famous people sometimes, a lot of famous people within the industry, right? A lot of press converges on that. In today's day and age with social media, there are 10 times more bloggers at Baselworld than there are dealers. But let's look at the market for a second and where the market is going as far as the watch industry in general, right? You see a lot of trends right now of manufacturers getting away from their authorized dealers, cutting their authorized dealers, opening up their own boutiques, marketing their own stuff and selling directly to the consumer. A lot of them have e-commerce operations where they sell right online, right? So the question becomes, do they really need to spend $10 to $20 million once a year on this marketing stunt? The ordering part of the watches and showing the novelties, any authorized dealer can do. They can literally fly them into the company. They can do it that way. You can do it remotely now. You can do it online now. I mean, a lot of the stuff is very, very virtual. So yes, you would lose out on that hands-on aspect. But if what they're trying to do is sort of get away from the model of company authorized dealer consumer or company distributor authorized dealer consumer and get into the direct sales model, it becomes an unnecessary expense, right? As far as the consumers are concerned, Richard Mille and AP and some of the other hot brands like Rolex, they're getting more value out of every blogger and their mother talking about Rolexes and Richard Mille's and Audemars Piguet, at least the hot models are posting on Instagram every other day, than they will ever get out of this Basel show. I think the times are just changing. If I'm a company and I'm looking at a marketing budget overall, do I want to take that $20 million and maybe I want to appropriate it elsewhere? If I'm somebody like Jaeger LeCoultre or IWC who is heavy-duty advertising their e-commerce model, wouldn't I rather put that into online marketing that will drive direct sales from a consumer to me? Or do I take that $20 million and spend it on a big fancy show where if I'm IWC and I'm coming out with new pilot watches, I hang an entire airplane in my booth, right? That knows how much that would cost. So again, my opinion, I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but I feel like the future of these huge shows are dwindling down, and the reason for that is because a lot of these companies are slowly going to realize if they, more or less cutting out the authorized dealer, cutting out the middleman and going directly to the consumer, they could probably see that money well spent elsewhere. And that probably would be my opinion, and hope that's the right answer. I'm not sure if so. Again, just my opinion. Next question is from Tito R. Roman, I really appreciate how you plainly explain these answers to questions I asked. I've been thinking of getting a Patek pocket watch, studying first, and Audemars vintage manual wristwatch and pocket watches. I've been looking at the auction house's website. Would these be the highest quality and trusted in your opinion? Thanks in advance. Not going to specifically talk about pocket watches, whether they're Patek or Audemars or wristwatches. That's really irrelevant. I do want to talk about auction houses, and I think I may have touched upon the subject before. Auction houses are not often the most reliable source or trusted source. Much like I said, I often said to you guys, looking at prices online sometimes can be very deceiving. And the reason for that is because a lot of the stuff that's online people don't have, so it tends to be a little overpriced. The market is always changes. People price things higher to be on the safe side, to ensure they're able to source the watch or not to miss out. Oftentimes we price things higher because people make offers. So if I'm willing to sell a watch for 18,000, I'll price it up there for 20 to allow somebody to make an offer and leave myself some negotiation rooms. It's pretty simple, really. The same thing happens in any store nowadays. Somebody walks in, you hit them up high, especially cars, for example. You hit them up high and you come down within the reason where everybody's happy. Oldest trick in the book, right? Used car salespeople. Everybody loves those, right? But auction houses are mostly reliant not on consumer for consignment of goods. That's right. Most auction houses, specifically when it comes to watches, probably 85% of their consignment comes from guys like us. I myself consign to auctions. I've consigned to Christie's, I've consigned to Antiquorum. Antiquorum probably being the most one I consign to because it's very watch specific and they're not just looking for higher end goods, they're looking for some mid-range stuff as well. You don't necessarily have to give them a rare Rolex for $500,000 like Philips, for example. Philips will not touch a $5,000 watch and put it in their auction alongside with some of the important pieces that they make. They sort of keep a high-end thresholds, and for the most part, so does Christie's. When it comes to jewelry also, I sent in a bunch of items to Christie's and jewelry, and they would turn down some of the items. They felt like it didn't fit their snooty criteria. I don't know. But here's what happens in auctions. And number one, let's look from a perspective of a dealer, right? When I'm consigning something to an auction house, I'm going to give them a reserve price where I'm either breaking even and then hoping it'll get bid up higher or even higher than my cost because I'm not looking to dump anything. I'm looking to make money off of what I'm consigning to them. It is a small, but still part of our business, right? So right there off the bat, that price is dependent on what I as a dealer am looking to get for a particular watch. And when it comes to pocket watches or older stuff, right? Older manual wristwind watches and things like that, we're the guys that often set the price by looking at the ceiling or based on what we bought it for or took it in trade for. Who's to say that that particular pocket watch is worth $5,000? If I consign it at $5,000 and they put an estimate on it, let's say $5,000 to $6,000 and it hammers at $8,000, is that pocket watch really worth $8,000? No, technically it's worth $5,000 because that's what I was asking for. And that's what I would have sold it to you if you were to call my website. Let's say if I had that pocket watch listed, right? Maybe I would have had it listed for $6,000, right? And you would have bargained me down to $5,000. If I paid $3,000 for it, then maybe that's what it's worth. It's worth $3,000. So it's very difficult to gauge what something is worth unless it's trading on a day-to-day basis, and that's usually the case for modern watches. For vintage stuff, especially pocket watches, which I'm actually really surprised that you mentioned that you want to get into pocket watches. It's sort of a dying breed at this point. There's not a whole lot of pocket watch collectors left out there. There was a gentleman that attended our show. He has since retired. He was probably one of the biggest vintage pocket watch dealers out there, and he slowly retired and phased himself out of the business. Luckily enough, he's made enough money in the business where he can comfortably retire, but he himself told me, it's like, I have still hundreds of pocket watches left and nobody really cares anymore. Now, there are obviously exceptions to the rules. A lot of rare pocket watches, but those tend to be in hundreds of thousands of dollars. But your, $1,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 pocket watches, they're not very popular. In fact, I've had a couple of pocket watches that I happen to have gotten in trade for a couple of grand, and I couldn't give them away from pretty big brands too. I had a Vacheron pocket watch that nobody really cared for. Another thing I've mentioned to you guys before, there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on behind the scenes in a lot of these auctions. I've been privy to shill bidding within auctions, and that's somebody bidding up their own stuff via somebody else. Whether or not the auctions were aware of that or not, I don't know, but that happens as well. Another thing is the factor of two crazies in the room, as I call it, right? A pocket watch goes up for sale, and there are two guys in the room, and their grandfathers happen to have had that pocket watch in the past. The pocket watch, the reserve is set at $2,000 to $5,000, and all of a sudden that watch sells for $25,000 because there were two big egos in the room kept bidding up the watch. Does that mean that watch is worth $25,000? Absolutely not. It depends on the room. It depends on the bidders. It depends on the timing. It depends on what it is. There's a lot of variables in auction prices, right? So if you historically take a look at a particular item within auction, there are times where you will find a humongous difference, right? Let's say if you went onto eBay and you search for a particular pocket watch, or let's say pocket watch is a bad example because there's not a lot out there. It's not really the hottest market right now, right? But let's say you took a regular wristwatch and you went into eBay and you saw 100 of them. all 100 of them used to new are going to be within a particular price range. But in auction results, oftentimes you can go on and pick the same watch, and throughout the years or throughout the many auctions of different auctions houses, you can find prices varying by more than 50%. Because again, there are too many variables when it comes to auctions houses. Anything can happen any given auction. So my answer to you would be, that would not be the highest quality, trusted, or reference to go by, unless you really, really dig deep and you go into past auctions dating back 10 to 20 to 30 years and really get enough data to be able to gauge that. Hope that answers your question. Let's take 2 questions from UK. Hey Roman, thank you for taking the time to make this video. It's always enjoyable and educational. You're welcome. Do you think we might see independent watchmaking become a trend in the mainstream thanks to all the exposure they're getting thanks to the internet? Or do you feel like they'll keep being a niche market due to very low quantities and basically non-existent marketing? Do you personally think it's worth getting into the watch business if you're located in Eastern Europe or in similar region? Would the combination of lack of trust from West European, American, etc. buyers and low income in those countries make the business almost automatically fail? Cheers. Both good questions. In regards to your first question, independent watchmaking becoming a trend in the mainstream. Independent watchmaking has a specific following, but you're absolutely right. It's a very niche market due to low quantities. As far as basically non-existent marketing, that's not really true. A lot of these independents have heavy-duty marketing, usually those that have sort of made it. And I feel like independent watchmakers eventually become mainstream. A lot of the independents that started have become mainstream. I think MB&F is pretty mainstream. I think Urwerk is very mainstream at this point. Yeah, there are those independent watchmakers that are a single watchmaker that still tend to stick with the business model that I'm going to make every watch. I'm going to make 5 to 6 watches a year, and I'll make a decent living doing that. They don't have a whole lot of marketing, but they have a following. They have literally a list of clientele that they can make these watches for. Eventually, independent watchmaking as a whole, not eventually, I think it's already pretty mainstream because it does have a pretty heavy-duty following. If you take a lot of the independents and you put them all together as a whole, there's a huge market out there for that. I also think that these are going to be the future collectibles. I said that before. In fact, I myself am on a hunt for original Urwerk watches that are out there. I'm probably going to hold on to some of the first MB&Fs ever made because I think these are going to be your future collectibles because they made them in such small amounts. But if the more successful an independent watchmaker gets, the more mainstream he becomes, and the more watches he starts to make, and the market becomes bigger. So how do you identify an independent watchmaker? Is it due to the fact that it's an independent watchmaker, not a big brand that's making all these watches? Or do you identify them by them being much, much smaller than the big boys? It really all depends on how you look at it, right? So now, of course, independent watchmaking is kind of mainstream as a whole, if you ask me already. And the internet does help a lot, specifically social media, but it helps them just as much as it helps everybody else, right? The big boys get just as much help from social media and online exposure from people outside the company just the same. So it's kind of an even playing field when it comes to that. So I hope that answers that. As far as getting into the watch business, if you're located in Eastern Europe, and specifically you said lack of trust from West European, American, etc. buyers, low income in those countries make the business almost automatically fail. No. I'm not going to talk about the watch business. I'm going to talk about every business. As a businessman, if you're going to get into a business and in the back of your head that you're afraid of it failing, or you set your mind that it might fail because of certain factors, then you shouldn't do it at all. When I started selling watches online, people were telling me I'm freaking nuts. Who the hell's going to buy $10,000 watches on eBay, right? I didn't think in that regards. Maybe it has to do with my personality. Anything I do, anything I get into, I'm an extremely positive person. I'm an extremely optimistic person. My wife is an extremely realistic person. She's not a pessimist. And so is my business partner, Arthur, my second wife, as my wife dubs him, right? Which is why we make such a good combination, because anything I see, I see an opportunity in to buy within my own business, I'm always extremely optimistic that I'm going to sell it. I'm going to sell it quick. I'm going to make a nice profit, and so on and so forth. Always doesn't happen that way. But I would say to yourself, if you're really passionate about this, if this is something you really want to do, analyze your market, analyze your market base, both from wholesale and retail perspective. It's extremely difficult to compete in the retail aspect of things unless you're doing physically face-to-face within your region. In that case, you need to identify and make sure, hey, do I have enough buyers in my area? Can I reach out to enough buyers in my local area that are able to afford these type of products and be interested in these type of products? Is there a shortage of watch dealers in the area that I'm in, or is it a couple of mom and pop stores and that's the entire game in town? Are there no notable gray market dealers in my area? Can I be that one gray market dealer in my area that can sort of take over whatever demand I may have in the area? What's going on the wholesale end of things? Are there any trade shows? Is there anything going on within the area I'm in? Or am I, let's say, I guess the closest show I mean, the one show that I know about is the watch show in Munich that happens every month. Are you in close proximity of that? Does it make sense to go out there and to be able to trade B2B or be able to buy things to fill your orders? Tax implications. Europe has VAT, which usually hinders the watch business tremendously on the gray market. And because of that 20% VAT, for you to come out here, let's say buy from a guy like me, you got to tack on another 20% before you bring it into the country. I know a lot of European dealers kind of go around that stuff, which is shady all of its own, and you can get in trouble from the government doing that. So those are the things you have to look at. If you're looking to get into this business or any business, you must always believe that you will be successful, and you will be successful, but at the same token, do it wisely. Look at some of these factors that I just mentioned and some other factors that I may not even know in your region. I'm from the old Eastern blocks, but it was the Soviet Union. I didn't know what a fancy watch even was back then. Then again, I was also a kid. The fanciest watch in Soviet Union, if you had a Seiko, you were God. Or another watch was an Orient watch, a calendar Orient watch that went for like 300 rubles. And mind you, when an average salary was about 80 rubles a month, that was a big deal to have in Russia along with the Seiko, right? Just consider all the pros, all the cons, put it on a piece of paper, sit down and think and say, hey, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to take the dollar that I have. I'm going to go out and I'll buy a bunch of watches with this dollar. Once my dollar is gone and I'm sitting on these watches, do I have ways to actually sell them? And how am I going to sell them? How am I going to market it? Am I going to go the Instagram route? Am I going to go the website route? Am I going to use platforms like eBay and Chrono24 to put the stuff on there and try to find clients that way? Those are some of the questions you should ask yourself. But nevertheless, if you believe, you will be successful. So think positive and things will be positive. Hope that answers your question. And last question is going to be from a regular on the show, Kuba Kardas from Poland. I know he's from Poland because he commented that recently, and he wants to have a drink with me in Poland. I'm actually going to be in Poland sometime next summer, Kuba. Probably going to be in Krakow and Warsaw, so definitely look you up. Question, what is currently happening with Romain Jerome as a brand? I heard that their main man left the company and also they now exist as RJX watches. And by the way, why was the brand always so low in market value? The tourbillon you've shown in the Horology's Dead video was stunning and for 30K seemed like a steal. Well, relatively, of course. Would love to hear your personal thought on the brand. I briefly talked about Romain Jerome when I reviewed Basel. Romain Jerome was that brand that came out during that hot time pre-crisis, 2008. I hate to keep going back to that. And, a relative new brand, they kind of took off from the beginning because they were very gimmicky. They came out with a Titanic DNA watch. It was something new. It was something that was never done before. It was a great, great gimmick. I was a sucker for it. I thought it was such a cool watch. Of course, they came out of the gate very expensive. I think at the time, the Titanic watch retailed just under $20,000, which was a lot to pay for a time-only watch that has a little bit of Titanic rust on it, seemingly, right? But nevertheless, they sold well. But at the time if you walked into Basel, I was in Basel in 07 or 06 and 06. Every dealer out there, every authorized dealer out there was hungry to pick up more and more and more lines because their business was booming. That was the time of the authorized dealer. The authorized dealer was kicking ass both on the gray market and selling to guys like us because the internet was starting to boom, as well as selling stuff in stores. Stuff was flying off their shelves. So they were out there picking up everything and anything on any line that companies were willing to give them, along with new companies like Romain Jerome or DeWitt or Custos and things of that nature, right? But as soon as the crisis hit, the market corrected itself, and guess what? The blue chips always win in the long run, and the newcomers or guys that are seemingly different and so on and so forth, they tend to slow down. When sales slow down in general, if you had to break it down, what do you think was the least slowdown in sales and what had the most slowdown in sales? It's pretty obvious. Probably Rolex had the least amount of slowdown in their sales. And Romain Jerome probably would have the most, along with some of the other newcomers. And again, that's just the way the cookie crumbles in any business, whether it's the watch business, the car business, or anything else for that matter, right? The whole RJX watches thing, that was a marketing thing that they did this year. They were going back to raw. So basically, they sort of got away from DNA stuff, and they just wanted to show their raw watches without any gimmicks on it, sort of going back to the basics. And that was part of their whole marketing campaign, right? Much like Seiko, let's say, took their Grand Seiko in 2017 and made it a different brand. Again, it's just a marketing stunt. At the end of the day, it's the same product, right? I told you when I reviewed them during the Basel episode, I told you I like the brand, but the reason I like the brand is because they are gimmicky. I like them for their gimmicks. I like the moon dust watches. I like the fact that you put on a watch and there's moon dust on your watch, right? Then they had the watch that you can't pronounce, the Lujulajuwa watch, whatever, the one that they made for the volcano, right? There's another gimmicky piece. I told you before, I'm a sucker for gimmicks, and I got a lot of guys in the watch collecting world are suckers for gimmicks just the same, especially those that actually have large collections and they want to diversify. I highly doubt that you will find a single first-time watch buyer that goes out there and goes, oh, I want a fancy watch, I want an expensive watch, I want a Swiss-made watch, I want a nice watch. I'm gonna go buy a Romain Jerome. 9 out of 10 times you'll hear Rolex, right? That's why the fate of Romain Jerome is where it's at right now, because there sort of would be that number 12 or 15 watch in anyone's collection. And when you're not hot, you're not hot. And when you don't have the history and you don't have the clientele behind you, hundreds of years of business, you're going to suffer. And you're going to try to do everything and anything to re-imaging your brand, renaming your brand, or whatever, or RJX watches now, to try and save the business, because it's still at the end of the day a business, and at the end of the day they have to make money. I think we're selling Romain Jerome's at like 70 off online. I mean, and cool watches, great concept, but they just don't have the steam behind them, so like some of the big boys, unfortunately. Hope that answers your question. Well, guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed yet another Q&A Tuesday. As always, hit that like button if you like what you heard. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber to my channel. Share it with your friends or those that you may think will enjoy this content. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday.